You might understand the P&L. You might even understand the balance sheet a little bit. But one of the things that I see most entrepreneurs who are like really trying to get serious about their financials that they struggle with is the statement of cash flows. And so in today's video, and part of this series that we're doing on financial statements, we're going to talk about an intuitive way to think about the statement of cash flows, and this will make a whole lot of things way simpler for you going forward. So stay tuned. So how are you supposed to understand this concept of the statement of cash flows? In a previous video, we kind of walked through this model of the funnels and flows, or you could call it the funnels and streams method of understanding your P&L. So you got your sales funnel, and you tweak that to get leads to turn into sales, and then you serve those sales by, you've got materials for the widgets that you might deliver. You might have commissions and those sort of things. And then that flow turns into gross profit that then goes to pay for overhead, and whatever is left over is your net income. Well, that net income flows into the balance sheet, but there are these, what we're going to call today, tributaries and dams. So things that add to cash and things that slow cash from moving through the system or stop it completely, right? It ties up cash. And so these tributaries and dams, they exist in this place called the Valley of the Bountiful balance sheet. And what your statement of cash flows is basically doing is it's helping you measure what is the amount of money, the amount of cash that over a certain period of time, if you looked at a month, how much cash got tied up from the dam number one? How much cash got added from tributary number one? What about dam number three, tributary number three? You can go down the list of these things. Well, I'll walk you through it here in just a second. And you will see that sometimes the dam doesn't hold back a whole lot of your cash flow, the stream of cash that goes into Cash Canyon in the Great Lake of Liquidity. I had fun with this. So sometimes this adds a whole lot of cash. Especially like if you have a company, like one of the people that I work with has a company that they take a 50% deposit before they start any kind of work. And they do it because they got a great product, they get great customer relationships, and they buy a lot of materials for these specific jobs that are kind of expensive. And so they take a 50% deposit, and as a result, whenever they're growing really fast, that it actually, even if their margins aren't great, it still contributes a ton of cash that goes into the Great Lake of Liquidity. And so in that situation, this working capital liabilities, these deposits, that ends up being a huge tributary. That's the same thing that happened with Amazon. So Amazon, whenever they first got started, they figured out something really cool, which was you've got a credit card and they can get paid immediately from that credit card, but then they can turn around to a book broker and they can place an order with them and have to pay for those books in like 60 days. And so even if their margins were really small, if they were growing, they're taking in lots of cash, and then way off in the future, they're actually paying for those items. So it provided like a natural form of funding for the business, which is really, really valuable whenever you're growing fast. So anyway, so what I'm showing you here are the areas that separate your statement of cash flows. So you can think of this area here, and this is like a county. So this is called working capital county. So this is operational activity. Your first dam is your working capital assets. So this is stuff like accounts receivable and inventory. Whenever these go up, whenever you start to lend more money to your customers through accounts receivables, right? So you provided work for them and you say, hey, pay me later. You're financing them. You're providing what your vendors provide you whenever they provide you 30-day terms, right? So whenever your accounts receivable goes up, your cash goes down. All other things being equal, right? Whenever your inventory goes up, that also takes capital, right? So that reduces cash and reduces cash flow. But on the flip side, in working capital accounting, there's these working capital liabilities like accounts payable and deposits, advanced deposits. So whenever a vendor gives you 30-day terms, that increases your working capital liabilities. That's a source of cash, right? And so you may not, so this is where it becomes kind of funky for somebody to think about this, is your net income. Let's say that this was supposed to be $1,000 if you didn't have any working capital issues, like you didn't have any working capital in your business, so there's no accounts receivable, no inventory, you didn't have any accounts payable or deposits. Your net income, and let's say that you didn't have fixed assets, and so you couldn't dispose of assets here, and then you didn't have any kind of financing, so you weren't putting in equity, you weren't taking it out. Let's just imagine that situation. Your net income, if that was $1,000, it would flow all the way down to the Great Lake of Liquidity, and this lake would go up. The balance of cash in this lake of liquidity, this think of it as like a bank account, would go up by $1,000. So these tributaries and dams are the factors that cause that net income number to differ from the amount of cash that flows into this Great Lake of Liquidity. So there are things along the way that disrupt the flow or add to the flow, take back from the flow, that make what flows in here different than what flows out here. Make sense? So we've got working capital that impacts this flow of net income to the Great Lake of Liquidity. The next county that we enter is this, we'll call this investments, if my marker will work. So this is investments county with a Y. And so this is where you're going to invest in buildings and equipment. And so for the idea of the cash flow statement is divided into three different parts. So you've got what you would call operating cash flow, and this is the core business. This is what you do day to day. And then you have investment cash flow, cash from investment activities. And that's whenever you invest in things that are used to create more cash flow up here, more net income, and improve working capital. So you're investing profits a lot of times back into the business to continue to grow your cash flow. It's just like whenever you play Monopoly, you buy a new piece of real estate and it generates more cash flow for you. And so you turn around and it starts to compound, and that's whenever you start to get really wealthy, right? So you've got investments that you put your money into, and then there's another county here. And this is what you would call financing county. So this is the area where you have financing of capital. You also have capital payments, or you're repaying things. And this is basically how you pay for the investments and the operations of your business. And hopefully you've got enough cash flow from operations that the only time that you're using financing to pay for something is whenever you're investing, you're using that money to pay for more fixed assets or things that produce more cash flow. So that's the cycle. It's this iterative cycle where you generate cash flow through your activities, you invest in new things using new financing that also improve cash flow, and it's a cycle. And so you should, if you're good at it, you're doing the right things, it compounds on itself over time. So that's one of the reasons why we want to understand the statement of cash flows, because there's things along the line that, even though they don't show up on the P&L, they can take away from that cash, ending up in the Great Lake of liquidity, which is where you want to be. This is like Scrooge McDuck. You remember he dive into the little thing of gold coins. This is like all your gold coins right here. So we want to try to fill that up, right? And so we've got investment county, we got fixed assets, and if you dispose of those assets, that contributes to cash. This is not something that people do a whole lot, so it's typically not a big tributary most of the time, but sometimes it's a huge tributary. And it could provide a ton, like if you sold a building and took that cash and reinvested in your business, you know, that's something that could cause a big flood of cash, which might be great. So then you move into this investment county and you've got financing capital. So this is so this is a tributary. This is flowing into our Great Lake of liquidity. And what's happening here is whenever you take out a loan or you contribute cash to the business, so you're the business owner and you want it to grow, so maybe you put some more money into it, or maybe an investor puts money into it. So this is where financing cash flow comes from. And there are also capital payments. So let's say that you got a loan, but now you got to repay it, and so your repayments get stuck from this dam, right? It holds back cash from flowing into your Great Lake liquidity. If you pay dividends, if you're a C Corp, same thing, right? If you distribute cash to yourself, if you're the owner of the business, maybe you got an LLC, same thing. You're paying capital out of the business, right? And it's not going to pay for fixed assets or operations. So that's the balance sheet. And what you're going to see whenever you pull up your balance sheet, and this is the point that we want to make, is we want to see there's three different sections that represent each one of our counties, and we want to understand how much cash was contributed that changed, that created a delta from your net income flow that was contributed by working capital liabilities, working capital assets, fixed assets, and you buying stuff like buildings and equipment, or you selling those assets like buildings and equipment, or is it new debt and equity? And whenever the money flows out from financing activities, is it from debt service and dividends? What we want to see is this is more like contributing more cash than this. That's a positive. That's called positive working capital. But it's basically whenever your working capital liabilities are greater than your working capital assets. That's what it means. It's the Amazon example. If we're investing in fixed assets, we want things that are really productive at generating cash flow. We don't want to be buying lots of things that don't generate cash flow or maintain the cash flow that we have. So that's one of the things to look for. Financing capital. If most of your cash is coming through financing, that's really, really bad. Where most of your cash flow should come from is net income in this working capital county. If your cash is coming from, most of your cash is flowing in the Great Lake of liquidity, is coming from these other two counties, it's really bad, and you're in an unsustainable situation. So once you know that, then you understand what do you have to do to get out of the situation. And if you're looking at a business where net income's bad and working capital's bad, and you're generating all your money from selling assets and taking on debt, you know that the problem is up here. All of this stuff is you may have to scramble to get this stuff in place to continue on long enough to fix these things, but this is where your effort goes. You shouldn't spend a lot of time on this other stuff. So, because this is the root of your problem. In fact, it's back up here, upstream. So, whenever you're trying to solve problems in a business, one of the things to think about is where along the stream do you need to focus? If it's a business that's got a good net income stream, then you're starting to think farther down the stream. And you start spending more time here. If you don't fix, you gotta get the stream first before you really start worrying about this other stuff. So you stay, if you don't have a huge stream in the beginning, you gotta work on that first. So that's one way to think about it. Anyway, that's the explanation of the statement of cash flows. I hope that was helpful. And for more videos like this, check out our YouTube channel, like, subscribe, and ask to get notified. And we'll see you soon in our next video. Thanks.